Hello, Michelle.
Hey, Katie.
Welcome to all our listeners to episode 6, Rebel Therapy Podcast. And today, as you teased last time, Michelle, we're going to be talking about Spider-Man,
Or at least the most famous line from Spider-Man, which is,
right?
with great power comes great responsibility.
I love it. I used to say that to my son when he was younger. He definitely got it, right? Okay, so do you want to sort of outline what we mean by that?
Yeah, well, I think that line has endured because
Yep.
like it speaks to something that is so just like fundamentally true about the
Yes.
human experience. And as we were talking about last time, once you kind of accept that you do have choices and you
Hmm.
have that freedom to choose different things in any circumstance, that then you are actually responsible for the consequences of those choices. Not all the consequences, but like, you know what I mean?
I was going to say your own personal responsibility, right? So responsible for your piece of it and the choices that you're making for yourself, right?
Exactly. And so, like, there's power in freedom, there's power in choices. Um, but when you have power, abusing it is very problematic. Like, I think that's actually how we've gotten into a lot of problems in our society. But
Yes.
like the responsibility piece has been lost in a lot
Yeah,
of
I
ways.
think so. And I think that, we were talking about this initially in the context of what it is to feel stuck and how to get yourself out of that place of stuckness. I think remembering that you have the freedom to choose for yourself, regardless of the restrictive, aspect of your circumstances, I think really does result in a greater sense of either contentment or I don't know, happiness necessarily, but a more sort of fulfilled experience of life. Eternal happiness is not really possible as a human being. But if I feel like I'm in control of my own responses, I'm definitely not in charge of all of the things that are happening around me. But if I can find my way through to access my sense of autonomy around my own responses, so taking it from that place of reactivity, which is patterned, to responsiveness, which is authentic and spontaneous and happening in the moment, then I think it's that sense of flexibility and being able to respond in life that lets us feel more in control of our own lives, and then experience the freedom of that sense, even if we're feeling a little bit restricted. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where the agency comes from, is choosing how you're going to respond to a situation.
Okay. So practically speaking, given we are both Gestalt therapists here, how the hell do you do that?
That's a great question.
Right. And
Um,
I think it comes back to that you were talking about before, the body, the felt sense in the body, right? Tell us again what stuck felt like for you or feels like for you.
for me, it's like it is actually physically repressive, like oppressive,
Mhm.
I guess both. But I feel very constricted. I feel like I can't breathe. I feel like I can't move. Uh,
Okay.
and so there is a way in which there's no space, right?
Hmm.
And what you were talking about is like creating that space, even if it's only a little bit.
Right.
So my first reaction to something I may not have control over, despite, doing a lot of work in therapy or somewhere else, like because of trauma, past experiences, lived experience, like, like you might just automatically always react in a particular way. That's your first kind of layer.
Yeah.
But the ability to kind of hold that lightly,
I like that.
breathe into it, take a step back, kind of internally, give yourself a moment, be able to actually like feel how your body's feeling. It takes practice for sure, but if you're able to create a little bit of awareness, a little bit of space, then you can be like, okay, I'm not just like going to react. I'm going to
Yeah, I
make a
mean,
choice.
100%. And I think that certainly for me, the absolute first step is to pause. You notice that I love the way you describe it. And for me, it's not exactly the same, but it is sort of a sense of like sudden restriction, right? Or sudden constriction, rather. So I sort of hold my breath, I get still for a second, and I'm about to react, right? So then there's that sense of urgency for me anyway, that I have to act, I have to do something, right? I think that's the reactivity aspect to it. And so if I can notice that my body's done this, right? And this is the part that takes practice, obviously. It's a really great indicator that I need to pause and take a breath. So take a breath, take a beat, whatever. It's not hours that I'm talking about. It's literally a second or half a second, a millisecond, whatever. But it's enough to interrupt that process. And I can come back into my body and go and say, okay, hold on. Let my brain catch up to my body, which is much faster. Our bodies react. Our brains need more time to respond, right? Because to respond to what's actually happening, your brain has to take in all of the information that's actually happening in the moment, as opposed to reacting in a patterned way that doesn't necessarily speak to what's happening right now, right? So if we can interrupt that patterning and allow our bodies the time and the space to actually respond authentically, we've got so many more choices, so many more options with which to respond, or different ways that we can respond with. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yes, and I think oftentimes the first step is to even realize that you are acting from a reactive place
Yep.
because it is so fast, and like you said, there's that urgency, there's that energy, like to just like fire back, right? And if you're in a
Like,
constant state of that, of just like things are happening and you're just reacting, and there isn't a
okay,
lot
so
of
like
agency.
I got a text and I was like immediately back in that place where I had to fire off a response. But instead, I took a second to then decide how I wanted to deal with it. And what I really wanted to do was say, I'll get back to you. Just give me a minute because I've got some things that I'm actually doing. But it was better than having to, sort of jump with an off the cuff or knee jerk response that ultimately might not have been what I actually wanted to say to the person. Right. So creating that space gives room to actually respond authentically. Yeah.
That's a key part, I think, because sometimes when you react quickly, you're not reacting from a place of like what you actually believe or you feel deeply or even how you
Mhm.
want to act in the world.
Yeah. And I
So,
mean, using that text as an example, the person who sent it was operating from a place of trauma, which then triggered my own sense of trauma. And if I hadn't been able to take a breath and pause for a second, we could have just escalated each other. Right.
mhm.
But either way, and the thing is, the person that I'm talking about, I actually want to be close to that person. So this back and forth escalation actually would push us further apart rather than creating an opportunity to sort of pause, ground myself, and then be able to hang in with that person, right? So that we could stay closer. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're not actually connecting in that moment, right? If she's reacting
Well,
from trauma and then you're reacting from trauma, then it's like trauma, 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 like trauma, the traumas are having a conversation, and it's
yes,
like,
exactly. And we can't even hear each other. So
nope, you're having two different conversations in a way.
yeah, and that's when like really profound misunderstandings happen and really, can get in the way of a close relationship. So what did we decide? We decided take a breath, notice your body. And I invite anybody who's listening to really think about it for themselves. What does happen to your body when you are put in a position where you feel like you have to respond really quickly or you have to react, right? I mean, like I said, for me, it's that urgency. For you, it's that real constriction. And sort of most of the ball game really is to just start noticing when that happens. Because if we notice, then we know to implement the next step, which is to pause, take a breath,
And
and
then
then give yourself the space. Yeah.
decide how to respond. Yeah, knowledge is in the body. It sounds kind of trite, but it's true.
How about data? Data's in the body.
Or what I do like to tell my clients is like feelings are just information,
Yeah.
indicators. And so even to be able to look at your own body reactions without having to feel alarm over them or any kind of judgment around it, it's just like, oh, that's interesting. My chest feels really tight all of a sudden. Like, what's happening?
And suddenly I'm totally restricted. What's happening? Exactly.
Approaching it with kind of curiosity.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like
No judgment.
no judgment and like believing your body, like that it has something to tell you.
Something of value, right?
Yeah.
And then operating from there. So you got to create the space. Once you notice the change has happened, usually take a breath. And then from there, you have different choices around how you want to respond to things.
Yes,
Freedom.
exactly. And the example you gave, I think, is a great one because it was like you realized you didn't have the capacity or the time in that moment to respond in a way that you would like to. So you might have to be like, I need to come back to this, or like, I need a moment, or can we talk about this later? It doesn't mean that you have to automatically re engage with the rest of the environment.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So the next time we're going to take this whole idea of body response a little bit further and talk about things having to do with like self-support, right? That's a place to start. So tune in next time. And please, if you like what you're hearing, like and subscribe.
Yes, it really is important. It helps other people find us.
Thanks.